Welcome everyone to the November edition of the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center webinar series. We're very excited to have you here today for a panel with a number of outstanding educators and seaweed extension folks. We'll jump into that in just a moment, but I do want to make sure that you know if you have questions throughout the webinar, you can always ask the questions in the chat. At the bottom of your screens, you would use the Q&A function. If we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we will send out an email answering questions. So please feel free to reach out to us through that chat or via email as well if you have specific questions for members of the panel. So members of the panel, welcome. First of all, thank you so much for being willing to take the time to be here with us today. We're very excited to have kind of a special webinar for this month's episode of our series. And what makes this special is that we're actually going to be doing it as a panel. So if you've been to our webinars before, a lot of times you see that I talk for like 5 minutes at the beginning and then I don't talk the rest of the time. But today I get to moderate a panel with a number of wonderful folks. So I will introduce them briefly, and then I'm going to have them jump in and introduce themselves. But just to name the folks that we have here today, we have from the Turner School System, Kristel Anuszewski. We have from Blue Hill Consolidated, Nell Herrmann. From the Department of Education, we have Erik Wade. From Booth-Based Sea and Science Center, we have Pauline Dion. And from Maine Sea Grant, the Seaweed Extension Specialist, we have Jaclyn Robidoux. So in the order that I just introduced you, if you want to start out by just giving a brief introduction of yourself, maybe your name, your current position, and what's your relationship to seaweed and seaweed aquaculture?
Hi, Maya and all. My name is Kristel Anuszewski. I'm actually not from Turner. I'm from Windsor Elementary School, which is just on the other side of Augusta. I am the librarian here at Windsor, and I teach STEM and library science and information science as well. And my relationship to seaweed started just about a year ago, and I went to a workshop along with a colleague. And I am really, really excited about seaweed now after having worked with it for a year. And I'm happy to be here on this panel and to be working with these wonderful experts who are here today.
I think I'm next. I'm Nell Herrmann. I'm a teacher at Blue Hill Consolidated School. This is my 25th year as a teacher. Most of my career has been spent doing middle school science, but last year I switched to an enrichment and gifted and talented specialist in our pre-K through 8 building in Blue Hill, which has about 250 students. And I actually first got interested in seaweed about 15 years ago when I was teaching high school and coaching a National Ocean Sciences Bowl team. And kind of concurrently, I was invited to be part of a research team that was studying the effects of ocean acidification in Antarctica. So when I saw the advertisements for the seaweed workshop that Kristel mentioned and the kelp curriculum, I was thrilled. And so I signed up for that workshop, and seaweed aquaculture is actually something that was new to me last year and a topic that I find really exciting.
Thank you, Nell.
I think I was next.
I think you're up next, Erik. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Erik Wade. I'm an interdisciplinary instruction specialist for the Maine Department of Education. I honestly came to seaweed and aquaculture through agriculture in the classroom, through the Maine Ag in the Classroom program. I have and had really no interest in seaweed at all, but I do love education. And a big part of my job is taking kind of things like seaweed and aquaculture and figuring out how to put it into existing curriculums, into existing lessons, how to really innovate with this kind of new and exciting idea. So, and a big part of Maine. So that's my kind of background, and I'll be talking like pedagogy and connecting the education to this really cool opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Erik. I think you're up, Pauline.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. I really am excited to hear what everyone has to say and answer some questions. My name is Pauline Dion, and I am the co-founder President and Executive Director of the Boothbay Sea and Science Center. We're located in East Boothbay. It's a program that integrates marine science, sailing, boating program for youth ages 5 plus. I got involved in aquaculture because it's one of our topics in the summertime in our summer program. We started that in 2016, and then had this great idea of asking the question about can you involve students in growing seaweed in the classroom? Can you start seaweed seedlings in a tank and transplant it into the ocean, and can it survive? And what kind of skill sets does it develop for them while they're in their class? So I have been doing that since 2016. I started with one school, and it has now morphed into 21 schools in 9 counties in the state of Maine. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to sharing.
Amazing. Thanks, Pauline. And last but not least, Jax, if you want to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Maya, and nice to be here with you all. I'm Jaclyn Robidoux. I am our Seaweed Extension Specialist with Maine Sea Grant. We are a federal and state program run through the University of Maine. Our motto is Marine Science for Maine People, so that's what we do. I have the pleasure of working with a bunch of seaweed businesses, processors, farmers, wild harvesters, students, researchers, chefs, you name it. Everyone in the seaweed space in Maine. It's an amazing, amazing position to be in, and look forward to chatting with you all today.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jax. So we'll just jump right in with our first question. And for each question, I'm going to kind of ask it to different members of the panel. We'll usually have multiple people answering each question, but it's kind of based on who is whose discipline and whose work relates to that question. So for our first question, it's going to be for Nell, Kristel, and Pauline. And the question is, what makes aquaculture, specifically seaweed aquaculture, a good fit for student engagement? And I'm going to start off with Nell, if you want to take that first, and then we'll head on to Kristel.
Excuse me, I'm just getting over that stuff that's going around, so might have to clear my throat every now and again. So in my what feels like long career, I have found that place-based education is always very meaningful to kids, and I live on a town on the coast of Maine. So seaweed education is an easy one to incorporate in place-based education. I've also learned that many of our students have, of course, experience with seaweed. They've seen it, but they don't always know a lot about it. So it's an easy one to catch their attention with, and to show them the value of seaweed in terms of the marine ecosystem and the global ecosystem, the earth. So it's a logical topic. Another reason it really was a great fit for my particular community is that a lot of my students come from lobstering families. And so again, of course, they're really familiar with seaweed, but many of them, in fact, most or all of them had never heard of kelp farming. And so, you know, a lot of times students aren't always engaged immediately around the topics of climate change and climate mitigation, but they generally are engaged immediately around topics like how to make money and what might you do when you grow up. So I kind of started there with the seaweed topic, and then got into some of the other benefits of seaweed and seaweed aquaculture. So it's a logical fit for where I am.
Amazing. Thank you. Kristel, do you want to add on to that and talk about your experience?
So our students here at Windsor are definitely familiar with agriculture and not aquaculture. So where Nell's school is on the ocean, our school is inland, and my colleague and I, Jana Dykett, who is a science teacher here at Windsor, she and I decided to collaborate on this to bring climate education knowledge to our students. And when we went to the seaweed workshop last year, that was the catalyst for all of what we have been able to do, which has just been amazing. And where Nell said that, you know, place-based learning is really important. Hands-on learning is really what drives our kids. And I was able to really engage my students with some hands-on experiences with seaweed. I would like to just say a big thank you to Pauline, who's just recently been at Windsor Schools, and she helped to set up a tank, which is growing seaweed currently. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful that students can feel like they are making a difference when it comes to climate change. And the more they learn about carbon sequestration, or when they are talking about, you know, just how to make the earth a better place, it's it's really very much of a just a changing experience for kids. They feel empowered, and that's really what we want to do for our students, right, in the classroom, and to give them opportunities to become solutionaries in the real world. So I would say that it was kind of the unknown piece about seaweed. A lot of students didn't know about it. They just knew that it was looking like beach litter to them. Now they are familiar with it, right? It's relevant because they're the ones who are inheriting the future. And it's also accessible. It's a part of who we are in Maine. And for all of those reasons, the aquaculture programming is a really good fit for my students.
That's really great to hear. Pauline, Kristel just mentioned your program. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience around student engagement with this too?
For sure. The aquaculture program that we run is called Exploring the Science of Seaweed Farming. It grew out of the aquaculture program I think I mentioned earlier that was part of our summer program. And we thought that, gee, we have this great summer program. Why don't we just keep it going year round? So that's really how it took off. And so we see the benefit of engaging the problem solving skills and observation and documentation skills, being able to be more aware of what's going on around them. I mean, as you develop those skills, everything else seems to open up. There are new things that you think about. And so again, to what Kristel had mentioned and Nell had mentioned, the whole experiential hands-on reward from it. The idea that they see that something like seaweed does deserve their attention and their respect. And they can also, with this particular program, they see it come full circle. So they start out with these little tiny seedlings and they see them progress to maturity. There is that relevance of STEM because they have to think about the impact of what a controlled environment is versus an uncontrolled environment. But again, I think that it just adds such great value to the point of, you know, this is one of the things that students need is more hands-on activities and more experiences. And we're excited because we learn a lot too in the summertime so that we can bring more. We're getting, one of the things we're doing this year is I'm really challenging teachers to find the next gen standards to really make that connection in the classroom so that it becomes something that is relevant in what they're teaching. So, so we have a Google Sheet going now, and it's exciting to see teachers connect with standard and what activities. So we're coming up with a bunch of activities. So it's very exciting time. It's fun for kids.
That's amazing. And for anyone on the call, we will be talking a little bit more about connecting with standards to what Pauline just mentioned as we're going forward. I do want to just go back to one thing that all three of you have mentioned. So all of you have mentioned the hands-on aspect. But Nell, you also mentioned what you referred to as place-based education. Could you just really quickly elaborate on what you mean by place-based, if there's a technical education terminology there?
Yeah, I don't know the exact technical definition, but so place-based education is looking at where you live and learning about where you live in the context of the earth. So when kids say, oh gosh, I've gone to the beach or I've gone lobstering, I know different kinds of seaweed I've seen. Even if they can't name the species, they know there are different types and so on. And the kids here, for the most part, have some experience with seaweed, but they don't realize or didn't realize before I taught the kelp curriculum to them how important seaweed is for global oxygen production, how, as others have mentioned, it's a carbon dioxide sink and helps mitigate climate change. They hadn't realized that there's this organism here in the place where they live that could provide a potential job opportunity in a potential future if, for example, the lobster industry goes away. So just learning about, yeah, where you are, your place in the larger context of things.
Amazing. Thank you so much for helping kind of elaborate on that term. And that actually kind of leads us to our next question pretty well. So you just mentioned some aspects of what students in your classroom have learned about seaweed. And so our next question is going to be kind of towards Jaclyn and Pauline. And the question is, what are some important aspects of seaweed aquaculture to communicate when teaching about it in the classroom and beyond? So Jax, if you want to start out with answering that, since you are a seaweed specialist and perhaps one of Maine's seaweed queens, I would love to hear what you've got to say on that.
Oh my gosh. I mean, where do I begin talking about seaweed? We could be here for a long time. But I think when it comes to educating people around seaweed, two of the things that I always like to highlight are definitely the benefits to people and to planet, first and foremost. So as was mentioned a couple times, like kelp farming is something that is really climate friendly. So it's going to be providing key ecosystem services, things like improving water quality or mitigating ocean acidification, playing a role in blue carbon, providing habitat for marine organisms. So those are all really exciting things that I think on the environmental side are a draw. Also, for folks who are familiar with agriculture or are learning about agriculture, kelp farming is kind of presenting this natural solution to some of agriculture's significant challenges around food or available land space, pesticides. On the people side, and this is what I think really connects with folks, is around just nutrition and health. It's a delicious food. So I think one of the most important things is for students to understand that they are connected to seaweed in many ways that they might not always see. I think that it's something that people oftentimes think is like, oh, if you're not in a tide pool, you're not connected with seaweed. And so thinking through and educating around the ways in which seaweed is in our local economies or in our local food systems, whether that is potato fields being fertilized with seaweeds, or it's in your pet food, or it's consumed in ice cream as an additive, toothpaste, you name it, there's a lot of different ways. And then finally, for folks that have such deep connections to the oceans and our working waterfronts, seaweed plays a big role in our economy. So again, on that people side, thinking about the ways in which seaweed creates jobs and diversifies income for people, fishermen, shellfish farmers, and kind of provides this like boost in the winter. So it is seasonal. And I think highlighting that seasonal aspect is really cool as well, especially as we think about place-based learning. So those are some of the things that come to mind for me around like what to talk about when we talk about seaweed.
Absolutely. As you know, I love talking about seaweed, and those are all things that get me very excited to hear about. Pauline, do you want to also talk a little bit about this question as well, and maybe some of the things that you're starting to incorporate your activities around for your curriculum resources?
I think, Jaclyn, that was great. I would just say ditto on all of that. And also, one of the things that we try to raise awareness is in a couple of areas, and that is it's seaweed, it's seaweed farming, it's using the water. We try to make the connection with land and sea and try to because students learn best, right, when they can think about things in their own world. So we try very hard to make that connection, and in the classroom and outside the classroom for them to explore where that connection occurs, whether it's in their food or in their interaction with the environment. But also talk about the folks that are involved in the actual seaweed aquaculture world, talking about farmers. We engage, we're on 4 separate farms with our project. We're on 2 farms on the Damascotta River. We're also on a farm in Casco Bay and one up in Gouldsboro, up in Frenchman Bay. So just talking about those folks and what that really means. Also, I'm amazed when I asked the students how many of them eat seaweed and just a deliberate, intentional eating of seaweed, right? How many eat sushi? I was just taken aback because ask these same, going to school and ask 10 or 15 years ago, they probably say, I don't really think I eat any. But the hands go up when they're talking about eating sushi. So one of the things I talk about is some career choices. And we talk about how we're not accustomed to just, as in other countries, just going in to a menu and saying, oh, I want this because it has seaweed in it. So marketing is going to be a really big an essential aspect of the success of seaweed, the seaweed story of the seaweed consumption also in this country, and in particular in the state of Maine. So we talk about that, about marketing aspects. How do you create foods that taste good? You know, so we talk about recipes and we talk about application. So how do you, because if it tastes good, right, you'll eat it. We talk a little bit about that, and then we just talk about basically what impact it has on the environment. But my big question in science is, can you grow it in a non-ocean environment? Could you create an inland industry? And I threw that out to a class once, and one of the students said, well, you know, my mom buys those tomatoes that, you know, you can grow in the winter through aquaponics, and they don't taste the same as regular tomatoes out of the garden. Will that be the same with seaweed if you did that kind of thing, like you did in aquaponics thing? So that's really cool to get the students to start thinking outside the box and get them using their imagination. So I hope that.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I really like you connecting it to the career choices, because it's a little bit different than just some of our more kind of natural science-based things. So moving on with some of the natural science concepts that both Jax and Pauline were just mentioning, especially around ecosystems, ecosystem services, biology. I want to go back to some of our teachers and science teachers specifically, to ask about some of the different types of science and science adjacent activities that engage students really well, and what about them makes them so effective. And keep in mind, this does not have to be just seaweed specific. It can be, you know, thinking about your careers in teaching and saying, like, this activity, my students loved it, and it had nothing to do with seaweed, but this is why I think they liked it. So this is going to be for a question for Erik, Kristel, and Nell. And Erik, if you're ready to make your debut here, you're up.
Yeah, let's go. So one of my first thoughts when we were looking at these questions earlier, and actually connects really well to what Nell and Jaclyn mentioned earlier about place-based learning. There's lots of based learnings that exist in the world. I would offer another idea around problem-based, which speaks to kind of what Pauline was mentioning about growing seaweed inland in a freshwater or in a some sort of brackish environment. As I thought about activities that I had done in the past, and this, I did not have seaweed as part of my science class at all. But when I think about the idea of like the pedagogy of how you can do this, kids love to solve problems, and they love to know that their work is being somehow used to make the world a better place, or to advance research in something, or to change something, or whatever it might be. That authenticity piece of it. So place-based allows that, absolutely. You're living in your area, you're working in that space, you're understanding your area that you live in. Problem-based, project-based, like any of those kind of other based learnings allow for very similar things, but you can expand on it a little bit more and reach to, like, how do we grow seaweed inland? Or how do we create a marketing program that shows people that seaweed is good and it's not as yucky as everybody might think it might be, especially kids. Using those kind of like bigger pedagogies to be able to include whatever activity you might have, or some way of engaging students in some authentic connection to that, I think is a huge way and a really, really great way to build this into whatever you're already working. Because I think it'll fit really well into a lot of standards that we would be working with in our classrooms, especially in science. Between ecosystems and photosynthesis and oxygen and carbon sequestration and even biofuels, like all of these things make really great connections. But how do students solve a problem around that? Like that was my first big thought, is how do you set this up in your classroom, in your science classroom, so that students are solving a problem and coming up with a solution to something that may be vexing the community of folks who are actually out growing this for their living, or for their in the winter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erik. I really like that kind of perspective on, extrapolating out to ask, the bigger problem-based questions around this. Because I think that's what people actually have to do in the real world a lot, as it turns out. So I think it was Kristel next, if you'd like to share some more examples of this type of pedagogy. So, oh, I think you're muted.
All right, sorry about that. So yeah, in terms of just being hands-on, we looked at the kelp curriculum, and I have to say that I really relied on experts because, like Erik said, he did not, seaweed just wasn't a topic that he introduced because it probably wasn't as it just, to me right now, it seems trendy in the best way possible, right? Like everyone's learning that seaweed does no harm, it only does good. And I do think it feels trendy now, but I feel like this is just something that it's new to us or novel to us, or to me, I should say. But it's something that's going to change the world. And we're just at the beginning kind of phase of it. Knowing that the students, have been really engaged in having experts come to us, which has been awesome. So we've had Jax at our school. We were able to work with Erik at the workshop. Of course, Maya, you put it on. Pauline's been to our school. She's helped Jana set up the tanks. I invited a chef Wilkinson, Andrew Wilkinson from the Boston area, to come in and share his Seaweedish meatballs. But it's been a whole school kind of an adoption here, from our littlest kinders right through to our school board, who's been learning about this because of this curriculum. And people they didn't know about it before, and now they do. So it's that novel information that's really hooking them. And then they're looking at seaweed as being a helper in climate change. So reaching out to those experts has been really, really important. And one of the things that we did is we transformed our entire school into an ocean the week that Andrew came and the week that Carrie Kaiser and Jax came to our school. And it really was hands-on learning for every grade, K to 8. So embracing everyone through the process was awesome. Our kinders were able to listen to Melissa Dagnall come in from Maine Ag in the classroom, and she was able to share the Wakame gatherers. And then our middle school students were able to do seaweed identification with Jax. And as I said, we have the seaweed tanks in our science classroom right now that Pauline set up. So our students are able to get hands-on experience with just measuring salinity on the daily basis. And so I guess what this is, just something for everyone is what I'm trying to say, like from your littlest learners to maybe your middle schoolers and obviously high school learners. This curriculum has just been able to be a fit for everyone because our climate is for everyone. I just want to quickly add, and cut me off, Maya, if I go too long, but I just want to quickly add that when we're talking about climate change here, we also were able to get some worm bins into our classroom. And I know that that's not aquaculture, right? But it's just more information, more ways. How else do we fight climate change? We don't want to keep putting our food in our landfills. We want to be able to, think of ways that we can recycle our food, and then we can use worm castings, right? And of course, our oysters are filtering water at an amazing rate. So this has just led to more and more and more learning about climate change. And it's really been quite the shift here at our school. Like, I so thankful, so grateful to all of you, all of the experts who have stepped up and helped out. Thank you.
Well, thank you for teaching all of this. And it sounds like some of the themes I really saw coming through when you were talking just now was that a lot of what makes this type of education so powerful is the ability to participate in like finding solutions for big climate issues and kind of having that aspect of hope, and not just
that transfer of learning too, right?
Yeah.
So it's really been a huge success at our schools, and our kids are really excited about seaweed, and they like to eat it. So that's a good thing as well.
Amazing. Nell, I think you're back now. If you want to answer the question, I can repeat the question too, if you would
No, I
like.
remember. It's okay. I'm sorry. I missed some of what Kristel was saying there, and hopefully what I say isn't too redundant. But I have found with students, particularly early adolescent students, that when you engage them with hands-on, real-world, relatable, concrete things. So we're not talking in the abstract, we're touching stuff, we're doing stuff. Like Erik said, we're maybe looking at a problem and trying to figure out a way to solve it. Those are the things that really impact kids. And when kids have had those kinds of experiences in my classroom, when I've been able to offer those kinds of things, those are the kids that will come back to me years later and will say, Miss Herrmann, that thing we did, I decided to study this in college, and I went to Greenland to study climate change. And those kinds of opportunities are the things that really hook kids in. In my community where I live, climate change is not always an easy topic. And so with the KELP curriculum, the kind of, as I mentioned, the way I got to it was a little bit circuitous. I talked first about seaweed and about kelp in terms of a career opportunity, right, in kelp aquaculture, and then kind of came to some of the other things. So it's almost like setting the stage to talk about, here's this opportunity and look what else it does, which is so great. I also found in my career that things like getting kids out in the field, getting kids collecting data, getting kids involved, again, are the things that make an impact. So, projects I've done similar to the kelp curriculum with kids are looking at invasive green crabs and figuring out ways to use the crabs, collecting data on plant phenology and figuring out how that relates to climate change, how even small temperature increases can impact plant life cycles so much. Some of those kinds of things where the kids are involved, they're touching things, they're manipulating things, and oftentimes too, when then they're communicating out what they have learned. So they're the experts on the topic, and they're talking to community members and parents and other younger students. Sometimes it's a really, really powerful model. And what's so awesome about the topic of seaweed and seaweed aquaculture and the kelp curriculum is that it does all of those things. So I was able to use what I got at the workshop and my contacts with the experts to really make the topic of seaweed very impactful for students here in Blue Hill.
That's such a wonderful way to put it. And I like how you were explaining the difference in how you kind of arrived at teaching seaweed based on the needs of your students. I think that's, really great teaching, and also just really an insightful way of approaching complex issues that are kind of a little bit of hot topics in our news these days. So one thing you were mentioning is some of the other opportunities that seaweed aquaculture and some of the other projects that you've done have brought to your students along the lines of, science communication or experimenting with like making things out of different products and stuff. So some of those are not just science-based disciplines. So for our next question, I actually want to kind of ask Jaclyn and Erik, what areas of study can seaweed aquaculture be connected to? So Jax, if you want to start out just kind of talking about the aspects of seaweed aquaculture beyond the ecology, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thanks. This is such a fun question because the list is so long. I think oftentimes people imagine that in order to be in the seaweed space or to like do this seaweed aquaculture thing, you need to have a marine biology degree or start a seaweed farm. And those are amazing ways to get into it too, but seaweed farming is a really young industry here, and we have a long way to go, and it really is so interdisciplinary. So on the list of different types of disciplines, areas of study, and opportunities, like I have worked with engineers, ocean engineers, chemical engineers. We need tons of support in marketing and sales, convincing people that seaweed is fun and nutritious and delicious to eat is something that is totally in need of that kind of like support. There are opportunities for economists, business specialists, accountants. I don't think I know a seaweed business out there that is not like in need of accountants. Beyond that, in terms of like the support space, like things like small engine repair, boat builders, marine support businesses, distribution. I think of places like the Portland Fish Exchange here, where they're offloading thousands of pounds of seaweed during the harvest season. And that is such a critical space for our growing industry. Social science, food innovation experts, product developers, top chefs, artists. We have an amazing arts community that like really does a great job of incorporating seaweed and connecting with people in that way. I'm sure there's like a million things that I'm leaving out on this list, but you know, I think especially when working with students who have such diverse interests, there is a way to tie it back to seaweed always. And maybe that's just me because I'm biased and I can tie basically anything back to seaweed. But it was really so cool to see the diversity of options and areas of study and needs that we have in the space that's growing so quickly.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing all of those different ways that people can get involved in the seaweed world. I think that's one of the things that excites me so much about it too, because I have a science background, but I also love science communication and education and all these different things. So Erik, you just heard that list of things that Jax mentioned, and I'm sure she could have gone on for a very long time. Could you tell us from an education standpoint, what some of the standards that we can connect these to might be, and how we can incorporate and begin to incorporate seaweed aquaculture into our teaching?
Yeah, so since I hadn't heard that list before, I'm going to kind of do this off the dome as we go. So, and I think one of the things, Mike, we're going to talk about standards a little bit more towards the end, I think. But one of the things that I really wanted to touch on real quick was like looking at all of those careers that Jax just mentioned and all of those different ways of interacting with seaweed in some way, and the skills that are required to do all of those things. Because if you think about education from a content perspective, right, we could think about all of the how do we, how do we mitigate climate change? How do we, all of those big ideas, those big concepts that we work with. But one of the things that we also are doing as educators is giving our teaching skills to students to be able to do things. So for instance, one of the big skills that I worked with in my classroom was the idea of iteration. And engineering is all about iteration. Most of these have iterative properties to it all the way through. And students, creating that opportunity for kids to be able to try something and it just absolutely fall apart, and then try again, and then it absolutely falls apart, and then keep going until they get to where they need to be with the support of the teacher or an expert of some sort, somebody who is willing to give feedback and help the student to kind of keep iterating that process to whatever it might end up being. So that was my first thought was like iteration just moves through all of these things. And that's such a skill because, my students, I had some that were really great at not giving up and persevering through things, and others who would just throw in the towel as soon as it got challenging. So, as far as careers go, like that's not something that a boss would want from their employees, just to give up. So that was my first big thought. As I worked through the rest of them, and I didn't write them all down because Jax, you talk really, really fast, which is great. No, you're fine, no worries. So some of the other ones, like connecting, one of the big social studies standards has to do with the economy. And in fact, one of the big pushes right now is financial literacy. And from a student perspective, but from, as we all grow up to become adults, how do we deal with that? That can also connect really well to understanding how do you run a business, and specifically in this case, a kelp business. But how do you, how do you develop that kind of business plan? How do you work through all those things? But then how do you understand that if you you get a credit card and it's at 25%, that if you don't pay it off over time, it gets becomes huge, and businesses have to deal with those kind of things. So that financial literacy connection, I think, could be a huge part of this. And that's and as I said, that's a kind of a big push right now through the social studies programs. The other one that I really liked was, kind of, I think academically teachers will kind of will move to that big concept idea because that's what we're kind of the big focus. Our standards are on content, right? Content and some skills. But one of the great things that you mentioned, Jax, that I think is a really great extension of that is that idea of like that more kind of traditional blue collar aspect of this. Like, yeah, we need biologists. Yep, we need people to help with climate change. We also need people who understand diesel mechanics so they can fix the lobster boats or the boats that are going out to the harvesting and to set the lines. We need folks who understand how to fix a boat. Seems like an important thing, which I'm sure comes with all sorts of other things. How to lay a mooring, how to do all of those kind of more less traditional academic standards, I guess you could say. But a lot of our students, I know a lot of my students kind of teaching in a rural part of the state, that's what they wanted to do with their time anyway. They wanted to be working in, they love to fix their cars. They love to build their go-karts. They love to do those things and work with whoever and like get in there and really work around. So, and I think about like a CTE program that has, a diesel mechanics program, and that's great. And, those folks connecting those folks to, potential boat careers, working in the diesel mechanics or thinking about how to make a diesel engine more green or whatever it might be. But there's so many other ways that those kids who love that kind of stuff, whose brain works that way, to connect with this as well, which I really appreciate, Jax. I thought that was a really great connection because it is so easy to get lost in that, like, oh, we're fighting, these big ideas, when in reality, we also need folks who know how to do this, because it's certainly not going to be me. I have absolutely no idea how a diesel engine works. I mean, I know how it works. I couldn't fix it though.
Excellent. Very good points. And I would also like to learn how to fix a diesel engine. I don't think I could do it either. So Erik kind of started to move us into the idea of how, or some of the jobs, actually both Jax and Erik started to move us into the idea of what types of jobs are related to seaweed. And that kind of brings me to my next question a little bit, which is for Pauline and Jax, but what are some of the key considerations if you want to grow seaweed in your classroom in Maine? So this one's a bit more of a technical and specific question, but I have had a lot of people wondering about this recently, especially teachers. So Pauline, if you want to start out, since I know that this is your bread and butter, take it away. You got to unmute though.
Yes. Well, when we decided at the Blue Bay Seed and Science Center to do this seaweed farming program, one of the things we didn't want to do was to burden teachers with one more thing that they had to have in their classroom. So we started thinking about what are the things that take a lot of their time. And it really came down to equipment and also just having a goal for the particular project. So all the equipment that we bring to the schools is through grant money. So it started off actually as a CNET grant many years ago, and we just started buying equipment. And so when teachers decide they want to be part of the program, they do not have to worry about the equipment. We will deliver, and we deliver it. So we deliver equipment. What the consideration is that you need to have a space that you can dedicate to it. It's in the classroom, typically from the end of October to about early December. And so it's in a 29-gallon tank. It holds 25 gallons of water. It's 200 pounds on any surface. So it always makes me a little bit nervous when someone says, do you think this table will hold it? And I go, probably not. Making the commitment to have it in your classroom. And it is, we have a chiller going on and off, so it can create a little bit of disruption, but making that commitment and also having the commitment of your students, making sure that they understand why it's there in the classroom and what they have to do to take care of it in the classroom. We deliver the seaweed as well. It comes on a string and they hang it in their tanks and they observe it. And again, I share a logbook that has, as I say to the teachers, it's very fluid. You can add to it, you can subtract from it, you can make suggestions about information that should be in it. But the logbook is really important, and it's important that they collect data before the seaweed even comes to their class. We typically deliver water and equipment about a week before the seedlings arrive so they can adjust their water and the temperature of the water, and that they can collect data. And then we bring the seaweed seedlings in. They have a choice too. We work with both sugar kelp and alaria, so they have a choice that they could do one or both, 2 strands each, or 1 strand of each. And also, it's just very, I have to add that it's interesting how everything little is cute. So even a seaweed seedling is cute. And so the kids are always so cute. Also, I'm really impressed by the way students, depending on where the teacher's coming from, but how students take such ownership of the seaweed to the extent that they are concerned about its well-being on a daily basis. Like, is it, and also we fertilize, like, do we fertilize it? We're fertilizing at the same time, but also do we measure? And it's something growing, and is it growing? I had one school that named like their blades, the longer blades. So getting excited and being responsible for it being in classroom, again, builds that whole skill set, right? Of being accountable, of being really able to make observations when something's not quite right, and to discuss them. And also to, one of the questions, 2 questions when I go to pick up, and it inevitably comes up, and that is, are you sure that you are going to plant my seaweed that's my seaweed, so when I harvest it, it's really mine? So I even go to the extent that I mark the containers in the classroom and show them. And then we've gotten into color coding zip ties so that it actually goes onto the drop line, so that when they harvest it, they find the zip tie on the drop line. So that ownership is amazing. And then the other thing too is, remember, we're taking it from a controlled environment and putting it into an environment that it's natural habitat, but it hasn't really seen it. And so what are possible things that could happen? And just talking about how science, there's never like a bad thing in science. It just begs the next question. And so if it doesn't grow, what does that mean? If somebody's did better than the one, than ours, what does that mean? So sharing data is really important. And for teachers to be aware that that's why recording the data is important. And also, post-COVID, we've not been able to do our community events. That's also important, is coming up with a way, and I challenge teachers to come up with a way that we have this thing, it's like northern group, mid-coast group, and southern group. It's really kind of funny. We'd be able to separate it that way. How would you like to share it among your group? How do you share it among your school? This is a project you're doing in school. It should, as Kristel said, it should really transcend every grade. It should make them feel like they're all part of it. And the students that are doing it, they're the experts. They're taking charge. So how do they share what they've learned with the rest of the school? It's a really important question for the teachers to answer. Thank you.
Amazing. Oh, Kristel, do you want to hop in there for a second?
I do, just because I think that Windsor's doing something really cool. So we have a night at the museum, and students this year, through our solutionary work through the Maine Department of Education, are going to be showcasing their learning about seaweed with the community. So students set up displays. It's kind of like a science fair, except it doesn't have to be science related, but we've had so many students want to commit to showcasing this learning because they think it's so important, that they are excited about sharing out with all of their parents and aunts and uncles and guardians and brothers and sisters and grandparents, and the entire community comes out for this. It's a huge event. And how many people are going to learn from what these students have done, and how empowering for students to be the expert on this topic that very little people in our area are familiar with. And so they get to be the ones who are first introducing them to this, this miracle plant that exists beneath our oceans that's going to help us reverse what we've done for climate change. I just can't get over how powerful that is for kids. I love that.
That sounds like an amazing event. You'll have to invite me to it. Jax, do you want to add on just quickly about some of the key aspects or considerations for growing seaweed, maybe post it being in the classroom and once it goes out to the farm?
For sure. Yeah. So you take those adorable little kelp babies, and they really are so cute. But I think one of the considerations would be just the space around putting things in the water in Maine. So we grew this in the classroom, let's put it in the water. For schools that want to start their own site, they should know that seaweed farming is regulated through the Department of Marine Resources, or DMR. So schools could and have in the past gone through DMR's permitting process. They have limited purpose aquaculture licenses that are meant to be small scale and low barrier to entry to trial stuff like this. Schools have had success. I don't want to undersell that it is an intensive community engaged process to get a site like this. So it would require a lot of work on the part of a very motivated teacher or supportive community to see this go through to the tune of like a year of work in some cases. So, you know, it is possible, but it takes a lot of work, just like all of these things do. If that sounds like a lot of work and maybe you're like, oh man, we grew these little baby kelps in the classroom, now what? Obviously partnering with Pauline and utilizing the resources of the Boothbay Sea and Science Center is a great option for schools. Other workarounds that we've seen folks do is partnering with local farms to get fresh seaweed during the harvest season. So approaching a farm and saying, you know what, like we know we couldn't grow our seed out, but do you have just a couple pounds that we could bring into the classroom to look at and talk about and kind of bring back this seasonality aspect, like it's harvest season. Or working with seaweed businesses who can bring seaweed to your cafeterias. I'm constantly blown away by those seaweed meatballs. So that's another like fun way to keep the learning going from like seed to sale kind of. And so folks can, you know, classrooms can see the end products, even if it's not within your capacity to get a site. But if you do want to get a site, DMR is totally the place to start, and there's tons of resources there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And definitely the shout out to Pauline's program for helping connect students with farmers. It's amazing. So I know our two teachers are going to have to jump off right at one, but I want to have them have an opportunity to speak one more time. And I know Kristel's school is currently growing seaweed that they are going to put out with Pauline's classroom. I don't think that Nell has grown seaweed yet. But I would love to hear from both of you, aside from the, you know, actual growing of the seaweed, and you've mentioned this before, but what are some of the really effective seaweed activities that you've used? And how did you incorporate those into your larger teaching plan? And if you want to share a story that you find particularly powerful, if you had a student that came to you or something, I would love to hear that before you hop off. And in case I don't get to say anything, thank you again for joining us. The other three panelists will stay on for an extra few minutes after just to get to the rest of our questions. But Nell, if you want to go first with that.
Sure. So I mentioned at the beginning of our session that my role at my school is to do learning enrichment. And so part of my role is to coordinate a school-wide theme each year. And so last year our theme was oceans, and every grade level kind of became an expert on a different topic. And I taught the kelp curriculum to 5th grade. So they were the seaweed experts. And again, that model is so empowering and so nice for kids. So a little bit later in the year, I coordinated what we called a seaweed week. And the 5th graders were really like the seaweed ambassadors. And so they would get on the morning announcements each day and tell some facts about seaweed. They created an interactive bulletin board outside of the cafeteria that had sort of questions and answers, and they were super proud of it. There was one student, so you asked Maya about a story. There was one student, a young man, who would show up at my door frequently and say, Miss Herrmann, do you need me to do any seaweed stuff? Which was really neat. But the seaweed week, some of the best activities we did came from the kelp curriculum, from the book, A Little Kelp from Our Friends. So I know ones that were memorable for kids were making seaweed face masks that they gave as gifts, doing a lab where they compared and contrasted seaweeds to plants. We did a seaweed touch tank activity where they actually got to investigate real species. And we had experts that Maya connected me to from Maine Sea Grant and Maine Coast Sea Vegetables. We made the intertidal seaweed murals, which were all around the building. We ate the seaweedish meatballs. We had a Kahoot trivia contest about seaweed. It was great. So every student in the building, pre-K through 8, could tell you some facts about seaweed, even the little guys. So it really, I'm very, very grateful for the workshop and for the resources and the connections to experts. And I really can't say enough nice things and show enough gratitude. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for doing such an amazing activity with your students. Kristel, do you want to share some stuff here before you
Yeah,
have to head out?
sure. Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to echo all of the gratitude that Nell just expressed, because really when we're in the classroom, to be able to have experts come in and share their knowledge with our students, it's such a gift and it's really special to them. You know, they see our face every day, and when they can see experts come in, it gives them this feeling that, you know, they're valued and that you're taking time out of your day to come and spend it with them. And I can't thank you all enough for all that you do. I guess one of the final things that I will say is that if you've seen the artwork in A Little Kelp from Our Friends, it is absolutely beautiful. And the day that Jax and Carrie came into our school to work with our students, they were, yes, doing seaweed identification with Jax. They were also doing seaweed pressing. And one of my 5th grade students was able to press his seaweed and took it home to his mom. And the next thing I know is she's sending me a photo of the pressed seaweed framed on their wall. And I just thought that was so special. And he created something that his mother, you know, and their whole family now cherishes. And it was because of that experience of Jax and Carrie coming in the week that Andrew was able to visit us. And I think those are, you know, that's something lasting. They're going to have conversations about that for a long time. And it's a physical artifact that's going to live in their home forever and remind them of just what a gift seaweed is and that it really does no harm, only good.
Well, that is a wonderful story. And I love the art connection. Kristel and Nell, I just from MAIC, and I think all of our partners, y'all are amazing, wonderful teachers, and we appreciate all the work you're doing for Maine. And thank you also for coming to this webinar. Audience members, we do still have a couple more questions for the rest of our panelists, but Nell and Kristel, y'all are good to go because I know you got to run to go teach some kiddos. But thank you again.
Take care. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye, Kristel. So we're just going to go just a few minutes longer, but I didn't want to rush these last 2 questions because I think they're big, important ones. So we've just had a bunch of folks talking about all of the different ways that they've used their seaweed in curriculum, in their teaching. And Erik, I wanted to come back to you just to talk again about how educators can incorporate seaweed aquaculture activities in their curriculum, specifically to meet Maine's teaching standards or national teaching standards, since I know that this is your area of expertise.
It is. And so, you know, there are thousands of standards that exist, you know, throughout the Maine learning results. So what I wanted to do is just kind of hit some bigger ideas that kind of cover multiple standards, and an opportunity to, you know, as I said before, my position at the DOE is interdisciplinary instruction. And that's how I've always taught, was, you know, looking at, you know, I taught science, but there was always aspects of other content in my science class that my students were practicing either through skills or just learning new content or applying content that they picked up in other classrooms. So, you know, I would love to spend the time connecting every standard I could, but instead of doing that, because we don't have a good week to do that, some big ideas. I know we talked a lot about data, gathering data, looking at, you know, analyzing data that we find from you know, whether it be in the indoor tanks that Pauline does, or some sort of data with you know, poundage of seaweed that's harvested every year or whatever. Like, looking at data is such a big part of all content, and it's specifically math. And one of the things about data too that tends to happen is that it falls at the end of the book. So, and then summertime comes and we don't necessarily hit data like we'd like to. So one of the things that's really fantastic about this is data is easily integrated into sciences. That's not, you know, I think that's pretty straightforward. This is a really fantastic opportunity to kind of connect that data piece to other content as well, because you could be looking at this from an economy perspective and start really diving into the data of what kind of impact will this have on the economy, on on Maine's economy, on a global economy in the United States, whatever you want to however you want to kind of phrase it. What's the saturation of Maine's aquaculture throughout the United States? There are lots and lots of ways to look at the data that comes, because I'm sure there's so much coming out of it. The problem is more like, how do I pull out what we need to be able to move forward? So connecting data across curriculum, I think, is a great connection, especially with and then looking at not just the gathering it, but how do we analyze it and what do you do with it? How do you apply that, and what would be the purpose of that data? I really liked another idea that I kind of stumbled across around the math piece of it, is looking at it from a geometry. Is like one of the big standards that hits geometry is mirror images, symmetry, designs, things like that. But looking at seaweed from that perspective, like, is there symmetry? And if there's not, why isn't there? How does it serve the plant's needs for it to be symmetrical or asymmetrical, depending on, because I have actually no idea if it is or isn't, but I'm sure you'll tell me. How does that connect to the adaptation that it has to be able to survive in cold Maine winters? And does it at all, right? These are some really great big questions that students can answer. We talked about the art already. I think art is a huge connection to this. What I want to do kind of is connect the art and some language arts and some social studies together as well, in looking at culture around seaweed, from either an artist perspective or from how different cultures depict their stories, whether it be historical or current, around this use of seaweed in their culture, how it impacts their culture, how it has impacted their culture. Looking at through the perspective of fables and folklore, which is a big standard throughout all of the ELA work. How is that depicted in history, and how accurate is it? Does it make any sense? By kind of dissecting those and really looking at it through that critical lens, and what were they talking about? Is this symbolism or not, or whatever, however that works. And then looking at it just as a culture connects the social studies aspects of it too, is what are the cultures around this? How do we change those cultures, especially here in the United States, where seaweed isn't really the same cultural significance that it might have in other countries. So how do we go about making it more culturally relevant to us? And will it ever be? I don't know. Maybe it's a niche thing. That's some really great questions that students can kind of grapple with, is how, about why it's a big part of other cultures, and can it be a part of ours, or not? I don't know. It's hard to say. There's back to the economy piece, like that's another connection to social studies, looking at the data and how it connects to the economy. I really liked the idea of looking at it from a policy perspective too. I know Jax had mentioned the amount of the dedication that it takes to kind of create your own space if you were going to do such a thing. But that's policy, right? That's just developed through policy and through regulation. So is there, can students look at that policy and take out pieces that are relevant to them? Like, how can we streamline this process? Or does this make sense? Or why is this so important? Why is this piece of the policy there? Even though I may not understand why it's there, we can talk to somebody who does and explain it a little bit more fully, and really connect with those experts in other areas outside of the seaweed world, but also the policymakers, which again connects to the ELA standards, connects to social studies standards throughout that. I struggled a little bit. I wanted to find something for music. I was really struggling with music. I really want to hit, like, it's easy to do. I think it's easier to think of like the kind of traditional contents. We talk a lot about art, but what about music? And one of the things that I kind of stumbled across as I was doing some research is the idea, and this connects up to ELA a little bit, is let's do some, what songs that exist either culturally or not, or just like in general, have some sort of connection to the sea in some way. And one of my favorites, bands is Pearl Jam, and Eddie Vedder's constantly writing, his songs always have to do with surfing and being out in the ocean. Can students create these? Can students make songs that have to do with this. And then, like Kristel was mentioning, having that evening where parents and experts are coming in and things are being presented, and over the loudspeakers, somebody who really loves music, like my son, has built out this whole new thing on his clarinet that connects with the sea. In fact, there's actually a really, really great composer who lives in Maine who did a piece all about Maine, and it starts at the sunrise in the ocean and ends and kind of goes through the paper mills and kind of ends at sunset in Western Maine. It's a really cool, it's a really powerful piece, but the students can make that, could either do the music or the lyrics or however they would want to do that. And I thought that was kind of fun because I always love when kids make music with whatever they're doing. So then the last one that I really wanted to touch on was technology, because again, that should kind of permeate, be kind of woven through what we're doing. I really love the idea of, somebody just told me the other day about UMaine is working on forks made out of potatoes. They're like disposable forks, and they're just squished potatoes. That's all they are, like super, super compressed potatoes. My dog loves to chew on this really compressed cheese wedge that we buy, so she's not chewing on bones. So one of the interesting technology aspects that's coming that I kind of did a little research on was around the idea of using seaweed to replace plastic or be a part of that to make it more biodegradable. And I know there's a lot of talk about using plants to do this, like plant-based plastics and things like that, like containers to hold things. But I think seaweed can be a big part of that as well, since there's so much to it and there's so many like neat little chemicals that can be extracted out of there to be used as bonding agents. Or I love I always forget the name of it, the one that makes gel. Correct. Tell me, Maya, what is it called?
The carrageenans.
Thank you. That's it. Carrageenans. Yes. Those. And how those can be used from a technology moving forward, back to that problem-based ideas. How can these be used in other ways that we haven't even thought of yet that connect to emerging technologies around, green living, green space, composting. I know I have a friend who does lasagna composting, which is like seaweed layers with food in between. They just love it so much. They think it's the greatest thing ever. But how can we use that? How can we kind of build those technologies up so that students can be a part of that and come up with new ideas? Because a lot of times they do, and we just, they don't have an outlet for it. So, so those are obviously, like I said, I can't cover all the standards because that would take a long time. So these are kind of the big ones that kind of cut across as many of those standards as I could think of. And I'm sure there's 1,000 more, but we don't have that kind of time.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Erik. And could people reach out to you or someone like you if they had specific standards questions?
Yep, that's you can reach out to me and I'll connect you with standards. And we can also my program at the DOE is also does a lot with just kind of like thought partnering, working through ideas, connection to standards. But anything you really need when it comes to teaching something like this, my team can absolutely support with.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we have one final question, which will be a pretty fast question, but I just want to ask to Pauline and then Jax, where can educators find reliable seaweed or aquaculture resources to inform their activities and teaching with their students if they are working on building out some of these activities themselves?
Well, I think that one of the resources that's been cited over and over again is that kelp book that was produced. So I think I think the artwork in there alone captures your imagination. And I think that's one of the best resources. And also there's so many online resources that you can go to and just looking at, what's out there, what's being published in the literature. But also I would say go to cookbooks. This is another resource that, you might find interesting with your students, to explore with your students. But I'm not so much in the research aspect of it. So I'm going to defer to Jax because she's got more information. But I just want to add one thing, and that is Erik, for music, you might be thinking about, we do at the Sea and Sciences is a seaweed creative movement, which is a dance that we do with kids. So just wanted to throw that out.
I was going to connect that, but I ran out of time to phys ed. Nice job.
I love it. There'll have to be a part 2 episode. Jax, do you want to just mention a couple places where people can go to get reliable seaweed info?
Yeah, for sure. I think before you look for seaweed info, you should definitely be doing seaweed dances, though. Um, that just sounds so fun. I mean, off the top of my head, definitely all of the folks here and their organizations, so MAIC, Booth-Based Sea and Science Center, Maine Sea Grant, are all invested in helping people and have resources. So cannot say enough about just the folks you've gathered here for this, Maya. And then when it comes to other organizations that might be helpful to kind of guide people or give people info on seaweed and aquaculture generally, we have some really active and amazing professional associations in the state that are great on communications and are also really targeting younger generations. So groups like the Maine Aquaculture Association or the Maine Seaweed Council, they have online presences, social media, events, youth memberships. I'll also make a plug for an annual event that a group of organizations host, and that is Maine Seaweed Week. So that is the last week of April. It is right after April vacation. So if you're looking for like, what's a seaweed event going on that I could get my classroom excited about and involved in, that is a super fun one. It's primarily a food and drink festival, but there's always all kinds of seaweed celebrations, events. Last year, we did a day called Seaweed Saturday that was like an open house right on the waterfront in Portland. So it is statewide. It's just a great excuse to celebrate seaweed, and I'm sure we can get information out about that, but it's timed up to be a harvest festival. So if you've been doing a little seaweed stuff this fall, or even if you haven't, it's a great way of taking a week to celebrate seaweed and kind of has some momentum going there with lots of like chefs and recipes and stuff. So those are a few off the top.
Amazing. Well, all I can say about Seaweed Week is you heard it here first, and you should definitely go because it's pretty awesome. And to our lovely panelists, thank you so much. We are now at our time. To anyone in the audience, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I can connect you with any of the panelists directly, or with more seaweed information coming to a viewing spot near you soon. So just keep that in mind. And here's my live round of applause. I hope everyone else is also applauding you. It's amazing. I always love chatting with you all and learning about your work. It's just really empowering. And stay tuned for the next MAIC webinar, which will be in December about sea scallops. So not education, I don't think, but interesting. So thank you everyone for coming and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.